What's happening with Donald Trump? A red, scaly rash on the president's neck appeared during a White House ceremony, and the official explanation raises more questions than answers. Bruises on his hands, swollen ankles, incoherent speeches, all of this while American soldiers are dying in Iran. Stay until the end. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support us. Let's get into it. On the morning of Monday, March the 2nd, 2026, Donald Trump appeared at a Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House to honor Vietnam veteran Terry P. Richardson, a soldier who saved 85 lives in a 1968 battle. It was a solemn moment, a moment that demanded presence, focus, and respect for the gravity of the occasion. And it was precisely in that moment that photographers from Agence France Presse captured something the White House was completely unprepared to explain convincingly. A reddish skin rash, crusty and actively peeling, covering the right side of the president's neck, below his right ear, running down beneath his shirt collar. The image spread immediately, and the official response came quickly, but it clarified nothing. The presidential physician, Dr. Sean Barbabella, issued a statement saying the president is using a very common cream on the right side of his neck, which is a preventive skin treatment prescribed by the White House physician. The statement adds that the redness should last a few weeks. Preventive. That word is the central problem here. Topical preventive treatments, creams, lotions, therapeutic sunscreen agents don't typically produce what we see in those photographs. What appears on Trump's neck isn't a mild irritation or a superficial flush. It's a visibly inflamed area with visible crusting and active peeling. Any dermatologist looking at those images would say that is not what a reaction to a preventive moisturizer looks like. And what makes all of this even more disturbing is the pattern. This isn't happening in a vacuum. In July 2025, the White House confirmed Trump was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, a condition that causes leg swelling. The swollen ankles were photographed. The recurring bruises on his hands were documented. Trump himself admitted to the Wall Street Journal that he takes 325 milliliters of aspirin per day, more than 4 times the recommended cardiovascular protection dose. The White House itself attributed the bruising to frequent handshaking combined with this elevated aspirin use. But here's what we need to understand. High-dose aspirin is a blood thinner. It makes the blood thinner, the vessels more fragile. When you have a president taking nearly 4 times the recommended dose of a blood thinner, any kind of skin injury, any friction, any abrasion, any skin infection can become visually severe in a disproportionate way. Some commentators on social media were blunt. Skin that begins to bleed with minimal friction is one of the documented clinical presentations of anticoagulant overuse. The White House did not reveal the name of the cream. It provided no underlying diagnosis that prompted the prescription. It did not explain why the redness should last weeks if it's just a reaction to a routine topical treatment. And when pressed for additional details, the White House simply did not respond. This is not transparency. This is information management. The context in which this rash appeared publicly couldn't be more telling, and not just for medical reasons. Trump was at the Medal of Honor ceremony, an event dedicated to sacrifice, military courage, and the grief of families of soldiers killed in combat. 2 of the 3 service members being honored received the medal posthumously. These were families sitting in the front rows, widows, children who grew up without fathers. And what did Trump do after speaking for about 10 minutes on the conflict with Iran? He completely changed the subject to talk about renovating the White House ballroom. This is not an interpretation. It is not an exaggeration. It is what happened. Trump veered from an ongoing military conflict, one in which American soldiers were being wounded and killed that very same weekend, to discuss curtains, interior renovations, and a $400 million project to overhaul the presidential residence's lobby at an event honoring military heroes in front of those heroes' families. This matters for 2 distinct reasons. The first is behavioral. When a president cannot maintain thematic focus during a ceremonially charged moment of high emotional and political weight, that is not simply a gaffe, it is a signal. Senior political leaders, regardless of party, are conditioned by the very nature of their roles to calibrate the environment, to read the room, to stay within the appropriate boundaries of a given context. Trump did not do that, and this is not the first time. The second is political. That same weekend, Iranian retaliatory strikes raised the number of wounded American soldiers from 5 to 18. At least 4 deaths were confirmed. Recent polling shows only 25% of Americans support the attacks on Iran. The country is divided, anxious, and without a clear exit narrative from the conflict. And the president declared, in reference to the war, "I'm not going to get tired of this." He said the United States has the capacity to go far beyond the 4 to 5 week initial timeline he himself had projected. This combination, bellicose rhetoric about an unpopular war, followed immediately by a digression about interior decorating, is not just incongruent. It is clinically dissonant with what is expected of a commander-in-chief during an active conflict. And when we place this alongside recent history, the incomplete sentences, the confused names, the subjects abandoned mid-statement during public remarks, a pattern begins to emerge that the American press has been reluctant to name directly. Trump is 79 years old. He will turn 80 this July. He is the oldest president in the history of the United States. And there is a growing body of observational evidence, not diagnoses, but evidence, suggesting that something is shifting in his public presentation, not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently and progressively over the last several months. This is something the public has a right to know, and something the press has an obligation to investigate. There is a fundamental principle in American democracy that transcends party ideology and electoral cycle. The people have the right to know about the health of the President of the United States. This is not opposition speculation. It is not sensationalism. It is constitutional doctrine and practice. The 25th Amendment exists for exactly this reason, because the founders and post-Webber reformers recognized that the president's physical and cognitive capacity is a matter of national security, not a private matter. And when we look at what we know about Trump at this moment, the picture is as follows. In July 2025, a confirmed diagnosis of chronic venous insufficiency, recurring bruises on both hands attributed to blood thinners and handshaking, but with an explanation that doesn't hold up when both hands display similar marks. An active rash on his neck described as the result of an unnamed preventive cream, with no underlying diagnosis disclosed, no follow-up protocol made public. A scan that Trump himself initially called an MRI, then corrected, whose results were released only in generic terms, with the phrase perfectly normal, and no detailed medical documentation made available. Compare that to what happened with Joe Biden. The press, rightly, pushed for months for answers about his cognitive condition. Independent physicians were consulted, neurologists gave interviews. There was robust, sometimes aggressive journalistic coverage of every sign of decline. Where is that same coverage now? Because the pattern of behavior we are seeing with Trump is no less worthy of scrutiny. It is different, but it is not lesser. A president who is taking more than 4 times the recommended aspirin dose, who has a confirmed diagnosis of a vascular condition, who is presenting multiple simultaneous skin manifestations, and who demonstrates lapses in focus and coherence in high-profile public settings, deserves the same intensity of journalistic investigation that was applied to his predecessor. Dr. Barbabella has been the sole medical spokesperson for the White House on these matters. But Barbabella is a military physician on assignment. His institutional loyalty is to the president he serves, not to the American public. That is not an accusation of dishonesty. It is a structural reality. Presidential physicians have historically tended to minimize, not to alarm. What would adequate coverage require? Simple. Full disclosure of the president's current medical history, with independent access to physicians who can interpret the data without political filter. This has been done with presidential candidates in the past. There is no reason it should not be done with a sitting president who exhibits a growing set of visible physical signs. The American public makes political decisions every day based on their perception of who is in charge. They deserve to know whether the person in charge is fully capable of exercising that charge, not because Trump is the enemy, not because it's a political agenda, but because transparency about the president's health is a non-negotiable component of a functioning democracy. The press failed with Biden when it waited too long to ask the right questions. It cannot repeat the same mistake with Trump, just from the opposite direction. If this content made you think, question, and demand answers, then do your part. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss any analysis. Now tell me in the comments, do you think the press is being rigorous enough about Trump's health? Or are we watching the same convenient silence we saw with Biden, just from the other side? This conversation needs to happen, and it starts right here.